I never thought I'd see the day I'd be standing in front of Karen's house, her perfect little HOA palace, loading hay bales into her living room. But there I was, Boots' muddy truck rumbling, while the woman who once tried to evict me screamed from her driveway, watching her dream home turn into my ranch. Yeah, this is the story of how the HOA tried to take my land, and how I ended up owning theirs. It all started on a Wednesday evening just as the sun was dipping behind the sycamores and the air smelled of hay and rain. I saw 4 HOA board members standing at my gate, their shiny shoes sinking into the mud like they'd wandered too far from the suburbs. They looked out of place, like Wall Street had gotten lost in the countryside. Leading the pack was a tall woman with perfectly ironed khakis, a clipboard tucked under her arm, and that trademark smirk that every Karen seems to be born with. She cleared her throat and said they were from the Meadow Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, the new development built next to my farm. Apparently my property was dragging down their community's value. According to them, the sight of hay bales, cows, and my old red barn was offensive to the aesthetic of their neighborhood. And the cherry on top, they were giving me 60 days to vacate or sell. I remember laughing so hard I had to lean on the fence to keep from falling over. My family's farm had been there for over 50 years, long before a single one of their precious cookie-cutter houses even existed. Hell, half their neighborhood sat on land I sold them years ago. Now they wanted to evict me from the soil that raised me. Karen didn't find it funny. She stood there like she was running for queen of the HOA, lips pursed, chin tilted up. "You'll thank us later," she said. "Your property doesn't belong in a community like ours." That line stuck with me. A community like ours. It wasn't just arrogance, it was erasure. The next morning I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just the HOA letterhead stamped across the top like a royal decree. Inside was an official notice giving me 60 days to vacate the premises. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a command. And that's when I realized this wasn't about property, it was personal. I made a few calls, pulled some strings, and by nightfall I knew exactly what was going on. Turns out Queen Karen herself was drowning in debt. Her house was weeks away from foreclosure and she needed a miracle to stay afloat. If she could bully me into selling cheap, she'd flip the land, pay off her mortgage, and crown herself the savior of Meadow Ridge. I'll admit, that night I sat at my kitchen table and stared at that letter. The longer I looked, the smaller I felt. Part of me started to believe maybe I was the problem, that maybe the world had moved on, and I was the fool still clinging to dirt and wood and tradition. My hands trembled on my coffee mug. What if I just sold it all and walked away? But then I looked out the window. The moonlight fell over the fields my father used to plow, the same soil my mother's hands had planted every spring. This land wasn't just property, it was memory. It was legacy. No clipboard-wielding tyrant was going to take that from me. That's when the plan came to me. See, if Karen wanted to play games, I knew how to play smarter. I'd dealt with banks and deeds long before she ever attended an HOA meeting. So I set up a small LLC, just a name on paper, and contacted her mortgage lender directly. With a few signatures and a quiet wire transfer, the debt she owed became mine. In one afternoon, I bought her house right out from under her. The best part? She had no idea. Weeks passed. Karen kept marching up my driveway every few days, barking about bylaws, complaining about my tractor, accusing me of hurting property values. One morning she screamed that she'd force me out no matter what. I almost laughed in her face, but I bit my tongue. Patience. Timing was everything. Because while she was threatening to take my land, I was quietly becoming her landlord. 1 month later, the timing felt right. The sun had barely risen when I loaded up my pickup with hay feed buckets and a couple of rusty tools, everything that screamed farm life. I drove straight into her neighborhood, past the perfectly trimmed hedges and shiny mailboxes, and pulled right into her driveway. The screech she let out could have cracked glass. She stormed out in a robe and curlers, coffee splattering from her mug, yelling, "Get this filthy junk off my property!" Neighbors peeked through their curtains. A few even pulled out their phones. I leaned against my truck as calm as a preacher on Sunday. "Morning, Karen," I said. "Just dropping off supplies." Her face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "You don't belong here," she shouted. "You've got 30 seconds to move that truck or I'm calling the cops." I shrugged. "You might want to call your bank instead." She blinked confused just as a black SUV rolled up behind me. Out stepped a man in a suit, clipboard in hand, the same one who'd helped me close the deal. He walked straight past her and said, "Ma'am, please calm down. This property is now under new ownership." The silence that followed was priceless. Karen froze mid-yell. What she whispered, "No, no, that's impossible. This is my house." The man handed her the deed freshly stamped and signed. "Not anymore." I crossed my arms, leaned against the hood of my truck and said, "Funny, isn't it? You tried to kick me off my land and now I'm standing on yours." Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into fury. "You can't do this. This is fraud. I'll sue you." I smiled. "Good luck suing your landlord." The neighbors came out now, whispering, staring, recording. The mighty Karen Mitchell, president of the HOA, the woman who'd terrorized everyone over mailbox colors and lawn lengths, stood trembling on the driveway she no longer owned. Her knees buckled and for a moment I thought she might collapse. She backed away slowly, clutching the papers, shaking her head over and over. "No, no, this can't be happening." But it was. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat. I just said quietly, "You've got until sunset to move out." By the time the sky turned orange, her car was gone. Curtains were drawn in every house on the block, but I knew they were all watching. And when the morning came, her pristine suburban home had a new nameplate by the mailbox. Little Creek Ranch. I parked my tractor right in her driveway, stacked hay in the foyer, and opened the windows to let the smell of the country roll through her old walls. For the first time I felt peace, not the kind you get from revenge, but from justice. I didn't take joy in watching her fall, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel right. It wasn't about payback anymore. It was about balance. She used her power to humiliate, to control, to erase, and she learned what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. Now, every morning when I walk past her old garden and see the horses grazing where her flower beds used to be, I remind myself of something my father used to say. Land doesn't belong to those who buy it. It belongs to those who respect it. That's the real story here. Not about revenge or pride, just about standing your ground when someone tries to take what's yours. Because in the end, you can paint over fences, build gated communities, and write all the HOA rules you want, but you can't legislate respect. And you sure as hell can't evict the truth.